Hello and welcome back to the Chaos Standard Podcast. I'm Uncle Flacco and I'm so glad you've joined us here today. That's right, we have the person, the myth, the legend, but like for real this time. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. I'm Heath. On Discord, I'm called Teamer for Life. I played League for a while, on Undapp. I want to say it was like 2015 or something. That was a long time ago. Anyway, uh, I played Leagues for a while on Undapp. I did pretty well. I top aided a bunch of leagues. And then after a while, I kind of drifted away from Untapped, but I'm still around the Untapped Open League server. I'm an admin and the reason why I drifted away is because I qualified for the Pro Tour. And so I played two Pro Tours, three if you count the set championships that happened during COVID. But uh, yeah, so I most recently I played in Pro Tour Murders of Karlov Manor and Pro Tour Thunder Junction. I did significantly better in Murders than Thunder Junction. Uh, but yeah, I'm here now.
Yeah, Teamer is arguably the best player to have ever played in UOL. I think the only other person who comes even remotely close is CFT Sock. Uh, yeah, just an incredible person, and I'm so glad that they're here today to talk about testing decks because it's not quite as simple as just playing a deck once or twice and then saying that you think the deck's fine. So, to start things off, you're in a testing team, right?
Uh, Yeah, I work with Team Sanctum of All for the Pro Tours. I didn't do well in in Pro Tour Thunder Junction, so I am not testing with them for the next PTs because I am not qualified for the next PTs. Uh, but the process of testing was really interesting with a lot of people that I think are better than me. Uh,
Yeah. Would you mind talking a little bit about how testing with a team works?
So the way Sanctum of All worked is we would all join a Discord server and we would have a bunch of channels that we would where we would talk about various ideas we've had. And oftentimes in the case of Sanctum, it was like a lot of Jason Yee and CFT Sock just like putting out just the most unhinged things that you've ever heard. And and the general idea is usually not to have the best things immediately because usually we have a lot of time leading up to a pro tour. And so we'll just sort of like take ideas and try to like push them to the maximum limit that we can and with the intent of, well, we might not have a good list right now, but if we test all these interactions, then we'll figure out which interactions work, which interactions don't, and what can we incorporate into future decks.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that CFT Sock is still doing really crazy things. Um, I did not know him very well in UOL, but I've heard stories. I've seen lists, and that sounds about right. Uh,
Yeah, they were sort of the originator of both the Analyst deck and the Slogurk deck in current standard, and both of those decks are extremely. I don't know how you come up with that.
I don't either. I'm pretty sure there was a vintage deck that used one of the commander cards that was really wild. Editor's note, it's called Smelting Vat. Smelting Vat was such a cool deck. Um, yeah, just super innovative decks. I really like that a lot. One other thing that I want to dive a little bit deeper into is how do you decide what deck you want to play at an event? Like, how do you narrow that down?
Usually, like, what happens is you'll just play a bunch of different decks through testing. Like, usually with Sanctum, it was you would hop on a Discord call with someone and you'd play games like in the call, and other people could like come watch the games. Uh, so there's a lot of like prep leading up to it, and people will, after games, people will write down their thoughts about like what happened in the games and whether things should be changed or whether the deck is good or bad or whatever. And through doing that process, a lot of times there will be a bunch of decks that will end up showing more promise than others. And so after that, it's kind of like just a lot of vibes. There'll probably be like 3 or 4 decks that seem reasonable enough, and you kind of just pick one based on how much you like it, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly, a lot of the decks that I tend to play are decks that I like, and I found that you tend to make fewer mistakes if you're playing a deck that you like. So um, that usually translates to performing better with a deck.
Yeah, like from my own experience with the last 2 PTs, uh, mostly what happened is the entire team would end up on like a bunch of other decks, and then I was the only person on a different deck because I did not feel comfortable playing the other decks. Like at Pro Tour Murderers, most of the team was on the Jeskai creativity list with Yorion and Atraxa as the creativity target. And I had been doing really well in Magic Online leagues with Amalia. I was just really comfortable with Amalia, and the Jeskai creativity list was kind of a work in progress, like up to the last few hours of testing. Like there were like last minute mana base changes, and I was like, I don't want to play this deck. I don't know if the mana works. Um, and then for Thunder Junction, I played Analyst, which in retrospect, everyone else played Slogurk, and I for that tournament, I guess Slogurk was just a really good choice. So maybe I should have like put in more work on Slogurk, but I at the time I just did not understand how that deck worked. So
Oh, I still don't. It's okay. Uh, a lot of the testing that you've done has been around established metagames, formats like Standard and Pioneer, but Chaos Standard is by definition a very unexplored metagame. There will be some ideas floating around based on what sets are legal, but especially if you combine sets that were never in standard or even modern together, then a lot of different possibilities open up that haven't really happened before. So, how would you approach such a wide open metagame as Chaos Standard?
So the most important thing is that you should be playing a deck that is like inherently powerful, and what I mean by that is like I don't think you should be trying to play a super offbeat strategy where like you have a bunch of underpowered cards that like require things to line up particularly well. You should be able to like look at your deck and go like, yeah, this looks reasonable. All these cards seem individually strong, and you should like look at all the cards in the card pool that are legal, and you should try to find things that just like stand out as like this is a power level outlier, and you should try to build decks with those cards.
Yeah, I mean, we give you multiple weeks, and it's not like you have to look through 20,000 cards. The current format is just over 1,400. I think with 2 weeks, you can look through literally every single card and say that, this one's really good and this one's kind of okay. And just do that for every single card. And after that, you should have a better idea of what's good and what's not. All right. One other thing that I wanted to get into is like the testing process itself. Like playing games just as like a best of 3 set is really nice, but what sorts of things were you testing for, and like how were you testing them? Like was it just playing games or was there something else with it?
So this is sort of like a do as I say, not as I do type of situation because A lot of times what would happen is I would play a bunch of Magic Online leagues and like have my own opinions on things like through those games and kind of lurk in the background while the rest of my team did like more in-depth testing. So what they were doing is what my team was doing was often like, oh, we'll test this matchup like game ones with this card in our deck. And we'll play like 5 games and we'll talk about what interactions came up in those games. Or it would be like, oh, we'll play only sideboard games of this matchup with this specific sideboard configuration. And we'll just talk about what things came up in those games. And if you're trying to get the most out of testing, you need to go into testing like with a certain goal or certain question that you want answered. And if you're just like jamming games and not really like paying much attention to like what types of things are happening, why those things might be happening, then you're probably not necessarily going to come to like good conclusions on anything. But if you go into a testing session asking, like, how well does my deck function through Rest in Peace, for example? If my deck does function through Rest in Peace, how do the games actually play out? Then you get a better idea of like how viable your deck can be, but also like how should your deck be built to, in this example, like play through a Rest in Peace.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest point that I heard you talking about was like intentionality and making sure that you're picking up on things as they're happening during testing. You don't necessarily need to sit down with someone and spend like 5 hours cracking down on like one or two different matchups, but just as long as you're noticing like, is my deck performing well against the wider metagame, and are the sideboard cards matching up well into my opponent's different strategies, and making sure that the deck that you're playing is actually doing the things it needs to be doing in order to have a good time.
Yeah, for sure. Like an hour of like very focused testing and also like reflection on the testing too. Like you can write down your thoughts and like the person that you're testing with can like talk can also like write down their thoughts and you can like discuss if there are any like disagreements that come up about like how the game's actually played out, then that's useful information as well. But quality over quantity is definitely like a really important thing.
Yeah, I'm certainly getting disagreements from people during this format. I think that'll be fun to talk about during the wrap up episode for this format. Um, but yeah, just for a little bit of an outro. I know that we're recording this only a couple of days after the format's been announced, but do you have any thoughts about the current format and what you might be building if you were to play?
Yeah. So I looked at a bunch of the cards in the format, and some things came up that I thought were interesting. One is that like there, I don't know if this is me being spoiled from playing in formats that aren't Chaos standards, but the removal does not seem particularly good. Like you have like the kind of usual red suspects of like Shock, Searing Spear, that can go into like a theoretical like red aggro deck, and you have like Baffling End in white, and you have Long Goodbye in black. But there's not like Go for the Throat that just like lets you answer a more expensive threat at a relative mana advantage and then like double spell in the same turn. It feels like there's about as many good sleepers as as good spot removal spells, which is a little insane.
Yeah.
Like Pyroclasm and Wrath of God are both legal. That sort of thing, like in conjunction with the other thing, which is there are a lot of like really good mid range threats. Like Murders of Karlov Manor has a lot of power packed into it. You have cards like Cryptic Coat that are legal that just like let you grind forever. Sharp Eyed Rookie is a really powerful 2 drop. Its stats are really good, and if you get to untap with it, then you just get to investigate a bunch of times, and Sharp-Eyed Rookie becomes much larger than like pretty much every other 2-drop in the format. Thragtusk is legal. That puts a huge amount of pressure on any aggressive strategy to like be able to power through Thragtusk somehow. Uh, and so there are a lot of things that push me towards wanting to play more proactive strategies that go a little bit bigger, I would say. Cards like Birds of Paradise look very appealing because in theory they take advantage of the like relative lack of early removal in exchange for like not very much investment. They push you as the person playing a Mana Acceler into just like slamming Haymaker after Haymaker, and your opponent can't really interact with them with like while also advancing their own game plan. So I would be looking to spend the early turns getting on board, taking advantage of the relative lack of early removal. And that sort of strategy is also more helpful because it lets you get to Thragtusk earlier, which is you might spend an early turn like casting Farseek. And theoretically you could like that could be a window for an aggressive deck to take advantage of. But if you're playing a Thragtusk on turn 4, like that's a pretty good way to catch up. And if your opponent isn't pressuring you, then you're just like accelerating way ahead of schedule. And that like puts a lot of pressure on your opponent that they might not be able to overcome.
I've never seen Sharp-Eyed Rookie in my life before. That card's really good. What?
Yeah, it's this set also has Lamplight Phoenix, which I don't know if there's like a great home for. But like it is like in theory it's just an unkillable 3/3 flyer. Like I don't the delta between like the threats and murders of Karlov Manor and like a lot of the other cards in the format is very large.
Yeah. I know there's nothing like Altar of Dementia in these sets, but yeah, 3 mana 3/3 flyer is just good. So, um,
We don't have CFT sock to break over 60 card Lamplight Phoenix combo.
uh, it all comes back around to him. Uh, well, thank you so much for doing this with me. This was a fun time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah. And I thank all of you, the listeners, for listening to this episode. As always, the link to join UOL will be in the description. We'd love to see you there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.